Well, I was the only foreign journalist officially approved to be in Tibet at that time, and what I saw was a city engulfed by the most extraordinary, one could only really call it ethnic violence. It began on Friday last week around midday and consumed not only the whole of the old Tibetan quarter of Lhasa, but as I later saw it after the violence subsided, a vast swathe of the city itself, extending well into the areas predominantly occupied by ethnic Han Chinese. And what happened was that rioters targeted particular businesses which they knew to be owned by ethnic Chinese. They marked those businesses which were Tibetan-owned with white traditional scarves, and all the others, pretty well all the others, across a huge area of the city. They broke into, destroyed, looted, piled up material that they'd pulled out of these shops, set it on fire, and also attacked physically some ethnic Chinese whom they saw on the streets, many of whom, of course, fled as soon as this rioting erupted.
Are you taken by surprise about the sense of feeling amongst those in Tibet right now?
Well, there was a great deal of surprise at the vehemence of this unrest. I think it caught the authorities by surprise. I think it was an intelligence failure on the part of the Chinese government. Only the night before this unrest erupted, a Chinese government official told me that the situation in Lhasa was now stable. In fact, what we saw less than 24 hours later was the biggest outbreak of unrest in Lhasa, as well as you've just mentioned, across ethnic areas, ethnically Tibetan areas of China over a very wide area that we've seen since 1959, when there was a huge anti-Chinese uprising in Tibet that caused the Dalai Lama to flee into India. I think the Chinese were caught totally unprepared for this.
And the Chinese, of course, suggesting that the Dalai Lama is actually encouraging this uprising. Is there any credence to that argument from what you understood from Tibetans?
I didn't see any evidence of that at all, and what I saw, in fact, looked very much like spontaneous unrest, fueled by a number of different factors. One was the anniversary of this 1959 uprising that I mentioned. That is always a sensitive period in Tibetan history. There was also a very strong sense that with the Olympics coming up in Beijing in August, this was a golden opportunity for Tibetans to bring the international community's attention to their problems. But also there were economic factors involved here. Many people I spoke to watching these protests, ordinary Tibetans, ordinary Lhasa residents, who seemed to be approving of what was going on, were approving because they had strong economic grievances. Inflation in Tibet, as it is in many parts of China and the rest of China, is serious now, and people are deeply resentful of these price rises. They say they had been promised by Chinese officials that the establishment of a new railway link between Lhasa and Beijing in 2006 would help keep prices down. That's clearly not been the case. And the ethnic Chinese in that part of the city, in the old Tibetan quarter, now control most of the businesses, not just shops, but also the taxi industry. Many taxis had stones thrown at them at the beginning of the protests. So there were all these simmering grievances which suddenly came together and erupted into this extraordinary display of violence.